you know, I always think of these things in terms of my mother. If my mother went to this film in the theater and walked out with no discussion, I think she would have a very distorted conception of this issue. And so we're here, and this is good. This is why I didn't really care if we screen the film. I think it's a good thing. But there's a period here in which we can reframe the film. My concern with films like this, which are essentially liberal takes on problems that I see as needing a radical analysis, and films that point the finger sort of elsewhere instead of looking in the mirror. And that's the problem I see. I did a talk recently called No Nukes, No Empire, which by that I meant if you're serious about nuclear abolition, you have to be serious about abolishing the American empire, because nuclear weapons are a source of power. The US government knows that, and it's attached to the continued nuclear arsenal because of that. And that's true every bit as much of Barack Obama as it was of George Bush, true of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, that's the nature of the institutional sort of foreign policy that we have. So I think both things are true. It's a good film to see, but it's a film that I think needs to be critically analyzed.
The objective of trying to get rid of nuclear weapons under the present structure of the world, where there is one power that claims to have, well, the right to invade other countries, change their government, kill their leaders, use food, medicine, and whatever it is as instruments to coerce other countries, which is basically what you're saying, the American empire. I don't think that the objective of trying to achieve a world without nuclear weapons is really realistic. You know, it has to come along with, so I'm trying to say that we're going to be stuck with this nuclear threat as long as we have this other, this power trying to dominate the world, because other countries will see, like Iran, the use of the possession of atomic bombs more like an insurance policy against being invaded. That's the way I see it.
The United States is not the only nation state capable of that kind of violence. Obviously, you know, even post-Soviet Union, Russia within its own sphere exercises that kind of control as well. It's just that the United States, by virtue of its global reach with bases in hundreds of countries, you know, the joke is, how many countries do we have military bases in? And the number varies, I hear different, but like 140. How many countries have military bases in the United States? The answer is 0. That answers everything you need to know. And it's by virtue of the fact that the US has that global scope and that we are citizens of the United States. I'm not a Russian citizen, I'm a US citizen. And my moral obligation is therefore primary here. And I think, I actually agree with you, that independent of a fundamental shift in American foreign policy, talk about nuclear abolition is basically fantasy talk. And it makes people feel good to talk about it, but it's not real.
I grew up in the Panhandle in Amarillo, near Pantex. And that is a place where, of course, they reprocess plutonium. And I was at a high school reunion several years ago following my viewing of the film documentary made by a UT graduate called Plutonium Circus, about Amarillo and the kind of the climate of opinions and viewpoints and beliefs about Pantex. And I said something to a very close friend of mine and her husband about it, and they jumped all over me. They said, leave us alone. This is our economy. They still live there, obviously, and that was pretty much what the film showed, that they were in denial and very defensive about that. My question is, I wonder who's buying the plutonium? What are they doing with all this plutonium? And given the United States being the largest exporter or seller of weapons in the world, are we selling nuclear weapons to other countries?
Unless there's something going on so nefarious and evil that even I can't imagine it. I don't think the United States is selling nuclear weapons to other countries. Yeah. Oh. I think the UN, I mean, the one thing that, you know, powerful states do is they do keep, they like to have a monopoly on force. I mean, that's the nature of governments. Right? They don't like to share the power to destroy things. They like to keep it kind of concentrated. But I think your point, or your comment, goes to a bigger point about the other related issues to nuclear weapons, because as Lisa started to say, you know, there are questions about mining and the incredible environmental destruction around mining uranium. There are whole parts, a lot of, perhaps just the cruel fate, a lot of original uranium mining happened on American Indian reservations, some of which have essentially been designated as uninhabitable. Right? I mean, there's whole swatches of territory that have been ruined by this. And so there is an environmental aspect to this as well that could be the basis for resistance to nuclear weapons and continued nuclear technology. On the other hand, the flip side, as you're pointing out, is there are whole communities whose economies depend on this. So you go to Los Alamos, you go to these places, and you'll get opposition. That's true of military spending in general. And it's by design. The way you protect military spending is to make it important to the livelihood of a large number of people. And that's been documented that was a part of the military strategy post-World War II to ensure that we remained a military state indefinitely, was to wire in that military production throughout the country. You know, work's been done to document that. So you've got both things. You've got the potential resistance because of the, you know, deleterious effects, and you also have the problem of people committed to livelihood. Part of what it means both to be a citizen in a democracy and a moral agent as a human being is to judge, is to make judgments. And I think that if you include not only the dropping of the nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but the firebombing of other Japanese cities, which came months before that. For those who don't remember the history, in March of 1945, the United States Air Force, or the Army Air Corps at that point, started firebombing Japanese cities using incendiary weapons and new techniques on how to basically create firestorms. It started in Tokyo, where in one evening it probably incinerated 100,000 people, and it proceeded across other Japanese cities. So if you add up the number of civilians, none of these were military targets, they were all civilian targets. The number of civilians killed in those months at the end of World War II by Harry S. Truman and other decision-making level folks, you're talking like hundreds of thousands, probably around 500,000 civilians incinerated. And I think the easy way to test whether that's something we should judge or not is no matter what the objective, short of saving the planet, maybe if you said that was necessary to save the planet maybe, but what objective would you sacrifice 500,000 US civilians for? And I can't think of a single one I would. So I think that in fact moral judgment and political judgment is not only acceptable, it's necessary. Otherwise what we do is surrender our moral agency and our political lives to leaders who have a demonstrated capacity for that kind of violence. The one thing I would agree with you is that nuclear weapons are not central to my own political activism. I put them as part of a broader politics. I put them in the context of resisting the US imperial project across the board, and it's certainly not the only threat. High technology, high energy society has also produced all sorts of other threats. If we wanted to branch off into the ecological crises and the way that science has created the possibility that long-term human life is no longer possible on the planet. I mean, yes, there are threats everywhere. The question is, what threats are most salient at any given moment, I think, and how do we fit them into an analysis that allows us to resist this kind of power on a consistent basis? Not this issue, that issue, but on a consistent basis.